whole time you sound like you're like really independent, but I think you claim you choose Republican.
Yeah, I'm pretty conservative on a lot of issues. Although I wouldn't say that I'm a right-wing guy exactly. But for instance, I don't think this economy is likely to take off unless we lower the tax burden, generally, not just on wealthy people so much. Actually, in my tax plan, I actually keep the top marginal income rate. I actually raise it a little bit to 40%. But I think overall, we need to reduce middle-class taxes, we need to reduce investment taxes, we need to reduce corporate taxes, not in terms of giving out corporate welfare, but just expanding economic opportunities for people. Now, on the other hand, I don't think that means we have to just slash spending on all the important programs we have. If you can grow the economy, you can generate more revenue that can allow us to pay for unemployment and welfare and the different programs that are important for people down at the bottom. So again, that's why I say I wouldn't consider myself sort of ultra-conservative on that point, because I don't want to completely gut the spending out. But economically, I am more conservative because I think that it's not a good thing to raise taxes during a time period where people are already struggling to get their hands on economic opportunity. I understand why people want to do it, because they come from the standpoint that says, well, look, we need more money to the government to pay for the social safety net because people are poor. And that's a reasonable point of view, except that if you tax a weak economy, you're going to depress economic output. And what that means is fewer jobs and, ironically, less taxes to fund these programs that Democrats and liberals and a lot of people just want to keep in place for the sake of the poor. So, but that's a big part of it. And there are other issues too. I am very strong on the idea of border security. And like I said, I think there should be a pathway to citizenship. But we tried it in the 1980s, where Reagan granted what they call amnesty, and the idea back then was that you would allow people to stay in this country without being deported, which was the right thing to do. But the idea was that we would secure the border in exchange for that, and that never happened. So, I'm pretty tough on border security, and there are a number of other issues too. I mean, like I said, I'm a guy also on entitlements. I think there's a role for privatizing Social Security, not completely eliminating the federal government's role in that, but George W. Bush got in a lot of trouble for that at one time. So, I'm pretty much a center-right guy, and but in particular issue, I'm happy to assuage your or to answer your questions about in terms of why I take a Republican position. Although on a number of issues, I'm probably about the same too. Anyway, you got a follow-up or any other questions?
Can you say a little bit about your past history?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I come from a family with a little bit of political lineage. My grandfather was a pretty prominent Democrat in the 60s. He wasn't a politician. He was actually big in Hollywood. He owned a record label called Dot Records, which is the biggest independent record label in the country in the 1950s. And he was a Kennedy Democrat, knew John Kennedy, knew Richard Nixon, played golf with him a lot, knew Reagan. Well, Reagan didn't like my grandfather for whatever reason. I always gave him a stink eye or something. I don't know. And so I sort of have an inherited interest in politics from a Democratic perspective. And like I mentioned before, I was a big opponent of the Iraq War in high school. And honestly, if I had it to do over again, I still would be. I still think that was bad, But and I also mentioned I supported the president when he came along. I'm glad I did in 2008. I don't regret that. But I started to just take further evaluation of myself as, in terms of my economic point of view, in terms of my ideas about the Constitution and so forth. It just led me to a different perspective on a number of things that made me think, well, on a list of 50 issues, I'm probably a bit more Republican. But I'm a writer. I write for a multicultural website, well, an African American cultural website, probably, called Black is Online. It's based out of the Merck Park. I also write for a Washington Times website called Washington Times Communities. And as a writer, I've always been a person who's been deeply studious about politics and history, and I think it's enabled me to sort of see things from both sides as much as anybody can. And so politics and writing has always been big passions of mine. And so that's a little bit, about who I am. I don't want to bore you with too many details about my biography. But yeah, but any questions? Yes,
I know you're a former student here.
That's right. I'm a former student here. I took Professor Hosky's class, and I was very obnoxious, she'll tell you. I was always mouthing off.
So what position are you for?
Congress in the 43rd District, House of Representatives.
And when's the election?
The primary election is next June 5th, I believe, and the general election is next November. So I mean, there's time, no time to lose. When you run for Congress, I guess it's a pretty big deal. There's only 500 some odd members of Congress, 100 in the Senate, 436 in the House or so. And what I'm finding as I'm embarking on running this race is that you got a lot of people who are going to want to tell you how to think, who want to tell you who to hire, how to spend your money, and who to associate yourself with. But my whole reason for wanting to get into this race is just to sort of be an independent thinker, you know. And so, in any event, but it's an exciting thing to try to do. And so, yeah, anybody here who can vote, you know, you don't have to vote for me, but if you live in Torrance, I sure hope you do, because I'll need every vote I can get.
What's the first thing you do or change?
I would want to introduce an economic package that, again, pulls from the best ideas of both sides. So we just had the fiscal cliff debate and then the sequestration. I don't know if you guys have been following that too much in the clubs and so forth. But basically, we had the expiration of the Bush tax cuts column. That was a big fight on Capitol Hill. Then we had these automatic spending cuts that were legislated as part of the condition to raising the debt ceiling last year. It's all sort of ridiculous. But my idea is I want to introduce a plan that keeps the marginal tax rate high for those Americans who are earning the most income. And I say this because, again, we're dealing with divided government. I'm not a type of person, I'm not a politician who wants to go to Washington and just put forward what I think is the perfect plan, but I know it's never going to go anywhere. I want to put together plans that can work in a House split between Republicans and Democrats. So I say keep that top marginal rate high, but cut taxes for the middle class, cut investment and corporate taxes. That way you can minimize the detrimental effect that will have on the deficit, but you can create jobs through increased supply and demand, and at the same time, reform welfare and unemployment spending. One of the things I talk about a lot that I think will be particularly helpful to people in very poor circumstances in the inner city, and I live just outside of Inglewood, you know, so that's where I'm coming from. Is reforming welfare and unemployment to where we don't cut the benefits, but we tie the administering of these benefits to people being moved into programs where, you know, they can become accredited, where they can gain an associate's degree, where they can go through vocational training, where they can go through corporate training. In other words, at the end of a period of a year or 2 years, when you're receiving unemployment and welfare benefits, you now have the qualifications, the accreditation, the skills to go out and get a job in the broader economy. Because the way it works now is, you know, we give people money to help them get by, and that's fine, but if you're sitting at home receiving unemployment or welfare, but you're not working, what happens is your skills ossify, you become rusty, your resume has that increasingly large gap of employment on it, and when your time is up receiving unemployment benefits, and they do cut you off eventually, then you're thrown right back out into the workforce, and you're even less qualified, you know, going out of the program than you were going into it. So what I simply say is continue to help people along, but let's also do something to add to their education, to add to their qualifications. So the first thing I may do as a member of Congress is if I get in there, I would want to put forward a comprehensive economic reform package that incorporates those two things. Lowering the general tax burden to create economic opportunity, but also maintaining but reforming public spending in a way to where it enables people to be more qualified and better able to take advantage of the economic opportunities that I think tax reform can produce. So, yeah.
So how are you going to cut down unemployment?
Well, it's essentially the way I just said. You know, we need to create an economic climate where both supply and demand are stimulated. And this goes back to my point again about how it is the two sides both have something to contribute to the equation. You have conservatives always arguing on behalf of supply side economics, and they'll point to Ronald Reagan and say, well, Reagan cut taxes for the rich and it created all these jobs. And then you have Democrats and liberals who often will say, well, no, it's about demand. You got to give money to to ordinary people in the form of public investments, and that will stimulate the economy. But last time I checked, you actually need supply and demand in order to get an economy going. And one thing conservatives forget is that, yes, Ronald Reagan cut taxes significantly. I think he did the right thing in doing that. The Reagan years had stupendous growth, but he didn't just cut taxes for the rich, he actually cut taxes for everybody, middle class and the working class, dramatically over the course of his presidency. And most of the consumption spending, as we know, does not come from people making the top marginal income rate. It comes from people in the middle class and the working class. So if they have more money to spend, and if on the other hand, employers have more money to invest, what you do is you optimize the economic formula. If you just have people spending money, that's great. That's going to lead to more economic activity. But if at the same time you're taking out of the pool of capital that employers use to invest and to expand, well then obviously you're going to make it a little more difficult for them to capitalize on the demand that's available in the economy. At the same time, if you just give big business owners tax cuts but you don't stimulate demand in the economy, what's going to happen is there's not going to be any reason for them to expand their companies because, yes, I have more money to invest in my business if I wanted to, but people still aren't buying my product, so thanks to the tax cut, I'm going to stick that in my pocket and, go on vacation in the Caribbean or something. So that's why we need both sides of the supply and demand equation if we're going to create jobs for the economy. And so, yeah, but I hope that answers the question. Anybody else? Yes,
question. So how do you propose we liquidate the national debt?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that is a tough one. Because even with my plan would increase the deficit too. Democrats and Republicans always complaining about how the other side is increasing debt and deficits and so forth, but both sides do it. It's because you can't really get the economy going again unless you increase the deficit. Now, some people have different opinions on that, but whether you're talking about increasing spending and increasing taxes, I think that sort of makes it a wash from the liberal perspective. On the conservative side, if you gut spending and reduce taxes, that's sort of a wash too. What you got to do is, again, my plan is based on growing the economy. It will increase the deficit in the short term, but by keeping that top marginal rate high, one of the good things about that is that will sort of maximize the effectiveness of that top tax rate. So in other words, even if I'm a business owner, my top marginal rate is roughly 40%, but if I've got more customers and it's cheaper to invest, I'm going to be making more money. So say instead of making $500,000 in a given year and paying 40%, I'm making $1 million in a given year and paying 40%. That's going to bring more money into reducing the deficit. But the big thing is entitlement reform. And I talked a little bit about how to sort of pull from the philosophies of the two sides to reform Social Security and to reform Medicare. I really do think that if you move into sort of a half privatization of Medicare and Social Security, that you'll save a lot of money on it in the long run. Because if you all had health savings accounts or private Social Security accounts, assuming that they didn't get crushed to death in the stock market, and I have ideas to prevent that from happening, if you could give those accounts to your children or to your heirs, whoever they are, when that next generation comes in, they're going to have something to build on going into the future, as opposed to the system we have in place now, where the government basically spends a bunch of money and we get old and die. And we have fewer workers paying for more retirees over the long run. So it's reversing that process. Give people private accounts that they can leave to their heirs, to their children and so forth, that we can take with us into the future. So you have more and more money in the Social Security and Medicare system that way, as opposed to just spending it, putting an increasing burden on, frankly, us, your generation and mine, to pay for, older people who are retiring and living longer and who need these programs, and understandably so, they're paid into them, but we just can't afford to support them because, the money keeps increasing in the outgoing direction, but keeps decreasing in terms of tax